those who have turned their back, from following the Lord, who do not seek the Lord or inquire of him.
There you are. Thank you so much for being here today. Folks, if you ever see me on video or you see me smile before I get up here, it's because I look for Rebecca, and Rebecca's always smiling back at me. But thank you so much for being here today. It's truly a privilege and an honor to have the opportunity to preach the gospel to you. It's a good crowd today, and I thank you so much for being here, and I hope the things I say here will be encouraging to you. It's great to have visitors. It's good to see Chuck and Vicki, and they're not strangers to me. And there's been, since I've left Wellsburg, there's been many a visitor come by from Wellsburg, and I thank you so much for coming by. And Chuck has done a lot for me, not only as the guy that always took care of my audio when I was at Wellsburg, but helped me with some of my secular work. And I've always been appreciative of Chuck and Vicki and how wonderful they've been to me. So it's great to see them here with us. It's good to see everybody here. And I know Tracy's not here, and it's because she is working right now, and she doesn't work often on the weekends, but unfortunately she had to work this weekend. And Lord willing, she told me this morning that maybe things will be done. She'll be with me this evening as we go to Milburn. So let's hope things will go well today. Today I want to talk about Zephaniah. I was joking around with the boys yesterday. I went with Darren and the boys golfing yesterday, and said, what are you going to preach on today? And I said, Zephaniah. I said, well, what's the title? I said, who? Because a lot of times when we think of Zephaniah, we're like, who's Zephaniah? It's not a book that we use commonly in our studies. It's not something that is commonly quoted from, and it's a very unique book. It's only got a few chapters, and we would probably say to ourselves that, well, it says the same thing that all the other prophets have said, so why even go into Zephaniah? Well, the really neat thing that we see in Zephaniah is the opportunity for us to look at all the bad stuff that happens around us, and then come to realize that maybe that comes back to you and I examining ourselves when it comes to the things that we do that is wrong. So what I want us to look at here today, it's going to be short, but there is 3 things that I find in the book of Zephaniah that we should look at and consider when it comes to this little book that we can get some things from. And one of the things that we need to look at is maybe not to rely on others as much as we do. If you look at Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 1, we say to ourselves, or we see what is written there. It says, the word of the Lord came to Zephaniah, the son of Cushi, the son of Gedaliah, the son of Amariah, the son of Hezekiah, in the days of Josiah, the king of Ammon, the king of Judah. And we probably say to ourselves, well, some of those names sound familiar, and they should sound familiar to us. Because we see that when it comes to Josiah, he was the last righteous king that we find in southern Israel and Judah. And he was one that was very diligent when it comes to the work of the Lord. If you look here in 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 25, it says, before him there was no king like him, who turned to the Lord with all of his heart, with all of his soul, and with all of his might, according to all the laws of Moses. Nor did any like him arise after him. And the reason why I want to bring this up about this reliance on people is sometimes we look at individuals and we say to ourselves, there's our source of our faith. And it should never be the source of our faith. Because if you look there in that next verse, you would probably say to yourself, then why did God do the things he did to the people of Israel? If they had such a righteous king such as Josiah, why does he put out this wrath? And you see, it says, still the Lord did not turn from the burning of his great wrath, by which his anger was kindled against Judah, because all the provocations which Manasseh, that was his grandfather if I'm not mistaken, had provoked him. The point that we should get at this is not who the king was, but really who you need to be. Because if it was just for a righteous king, then God would let everything go by. But if it was for an evil king, God's going to let his wrath still continue. But you see here that we need to really come back and ask ourselves, where was the people at this time and what were they doing? And there's where we get to that point. Because the reason why Josiah did all these things is because all these people were evil. Even his family was evil. Even his mother was evil. And he even kicked her out of the royalty line because of all the evil things that she has done. And it goes to show you that the problem was not the king, King Josiah or King Manasseh. It was the people that was the problem. And sometimes we say to ourselves, if we have a righteous president, or we have a righteous leader, or we have a righteous pastor, or we have a righteous elder, or we have a righteous preacher, or we have a righteous mayor, or a righteous governor, then we would have great things happen in our nation, or in our state, or in our church. But it really boils down to what you are willing to do. That's the thing that we find out here when it comes to Zephaniah, because here is a prophet that comes from a royal lineage, and he's telling us, you, and you are bad, but don't forget about you. And the big problem that you see here is he's trying to remind us that don't look for somebody for your answer. Maybe you need to look upon yourself. Look here in the psalmist. The psalmist tells us in Psalms 118, verses 8 and 9. If we're wanting to look for the answers, if we're wanting to look for the refuge, if we're wanting to look for how we need to find the source of our situation, maybe we need to take refuge in God. And Zephaniah does just that. He tells us to take this humble approach to God. Arrogance has been there for long enough. Egos have been there long enough. Take this humble approach and find refuge in the Lord than to trust in man. He tells us because it's better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in princesses. The idea that we think that some leader is going to be the answer to our solutions will not be our solution. It starts with you. If you got a drug problem in your area, and it seems like that is a common statement that is made throughout a lot of communities, the problem is not going to be we need better police or we need a better mayor. It needs to start with you. If you got problems within the community and you don't think that there's no end in sight, maybe that needs to start with you. If you think your church needs to grow, if you think that we need more brethren, we need more active individuals, we need more people involved, it needs to start with you. Because if you rely on other individuals, don't be surprised that there will be situations that come along that may be difficult. Look here in Jeremiah chapter 17. In the first two verses there in Jeremiah chapter 17, it tells us that here's the problem with Judah. The sin of Judah was written with a pen of iron, and with a point of diamond is engraved in the tablet of their heart and on the horns of their altar. And their children remember their altars and their Asherim, and beside every green tree and on high hills. It needs to start with the people. It doesn't start with the leader, it starts with the people. When people get tired of things, then it gets to a point where they get rid of the leader that is not doing the things that they want to do. It needs to start with you. So may I encourage you, if there's going to be an individual that wants to work on things pertaining to their faith, you have to start with yourself. King Josiah, when it comes to that righteous king, started with him. It didn't start with the people, it started with him. That's why there was no other king like him, because even at the age of 8, he knew that there was things they had to do. That comes to my next point. The idea that we need to really focus on ourselves. If you look at Zephaniah chapter 2, verses 4, and I didn't put verse 6 in here, but you'll get the point here in a second. It tells us, it goes, Gaza shall be deserted, and Ascalon shall become a desolation. He says, Ashdod's people shall be driven out at noon, and Ekron shall be uprooted. He says, woe to you, inhabitants of the sea coast, you nation of Cherethites. The word of the Lord is against you, O Canaan, the land of Philistines, and I will destroy you until no inhabitant is left. And what I put up here is a map. And just to give you an idea, we know where Jerusalem is, but if you're trying to figure out where some of these places being talked about, you see that some is being talked about over here on the coastline. You see that when it talks about Philistia, more likely it's over here. But when you look there for chapter 2 and chapter 1, it is talking about every place from the north to the south to the east to the west. God tells us through Zephaniah that they are going to be punished for what they are doing. And if they're being punished for what they're doing, then maybe you need to start focusing on yourself because you've got problems as well. Tell me this. How many times have we heard when it comes to an individual that they won't come to a church because there's hypocrisy in it? Does that justify their sin? That doesn't justify their sin. They're in just as much trouble as everybody else. When we hear somebody tell us that, well, there's no righteousness in the church, or we go on to find fault. If you're going to find fault in church, guess what? You're going to find plenty of it. Because when we come to church, we're not coming here to look how perfect we are. We're coming here because we're broken individuals that need to be healed. Where else will you go to be able to be healed? And we're not talking about broken bones and tumors and things of that nature, but being healed in the soul. And here we see that all these individuals, we can see that there's all these problems. I like how one teacher says, he tells us about how bad and bad and bad and bad these places are. And says, well, don't forget you, Jerusalem, you're just as bad. It's crazy that we look at the standard out in this world and we say that that's so horrible, and then we try to justify our own error. Zephaniah reminds us that God is going to come, and when his wrath comes, as Brody read there, it's not just going to come on all the bad people in the world, it's going to come upon you too. So if you got problems in your life with your sin, don't think that there's some milder execution for you. We're all going to the same place if we're in error. We're all going to the same place if we're righteous. Remember some of the parables that we have talked about where some people think that there's some greater heaven, or some people, and there's a belief in that today, some deeper depths of hell. It's trying to remind us here that there is a bad place for bad people and a good place for good people. And don't think that we're some exception to the rule. That's why you see there in Galatians chapter 6, verse 4 and 5, it says you need to work on yourself. And then his reason to boast will be on himself alone and not in his neighbor. He doesn't have to rely on somebody telling him he's a good guy. He knows he's a good guy. She doesn't need to be around. She's a good girl. She knows she's a good girl because she's trying to work on these things to make sure she's right. But we have to take this to the test. Let's take an honest approach. You know, one of the things I saw on social media this past week is they're talking about the shortage of officials. It doesn't matter what sport it is, there's a shortage everywhere. And there's always been these complaints that are pretty obvious. Bad fans, bad coaches, bad environment, not paid well. Well, one individual brought up a situation that I wholeheartedly agree with him with. The opportunity to bite and devour one another. Because I've seen it. If somebody doesn't call an out in the proper mechanic, then he's criticized for it. If he doesn't have his arm up in a 90-degree angle, somebody's going to give him grief over it. If somebody has his shirt that's flapping out of the back, somebody's going to give him grief over it. If he doesn't wear the premier gear. If he's wearing a shirt that looks a little bit wrinkled, there's going to be criticism for it. And it gets to a point where you don't have anyone on your side. They just quit. And I don't blame them. If all you're going to do is bash me, I have enough bashing from fans and coaches. I don't need bashing from my fellow officials. But my point is, sometimes we do that with our own. We bite and devour ourselves. To a point where when we want to go through the door, we have a hard time going through the door because we don't want to deal with the criticism in our own congregations where we're supposed to be labeled as loving and kind brethren. Put yourself to the test. When it comes to helping others out, where do you rank? When it comes to keeping yourself unspotted from this world, how well do you do? When it comes to showing compassion to total strangers, how do you fare? Because take that opportunity to go back and look. It's easy to judge someone else and find all their flaws and imperfections. But when it comes to you, it seems like you have a very lenient rule on yourselves. That's why Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians about how we need to examine ourselves to see whether you are in faith. Test yourselves. Because he tells us, if you continue on there in verse 5, I don't have it on there, but you see it says, do you not realize this about yourselves? Because Christ is supposed to be a part of us. And many times we quote about how loving he is, and how compassionate he is, and how great of a teacher he is. If you put yourself on the same level as Christ, how do you fare? Maybe we say to ourselves, well, I can't put myself on that level. Why? Because it, as Darren led, is the beauty of Jesus being seen in us? Because if not, why not? Then finally, the day of the Lord. One of the interesting things that we find in Zephaniah is he calls out just a variety of things that maybe we overlook because we don't know the culture of the time. And sometimes that's why we kind of breeze through it, because we don't get it. We kind of get the other things, but we don't get some of the other things that he talks about here. But in verse 9, he tells us, he goes, on the day I'll punish everyone who leaps over the threshold. What does that mean? You know, sometimes when I talk about certain things in Bible studies, it's not because I want to make you look ignorant. It's because that we got to understand why Matthew or why Zephaniah or why any other writer inspired by God put these things in here. But the reason why he puts this in here is because there is great hypocrisy going on right now. Because while they believe in a true and living God, they're also following superstition. I used to joke around with Tracy that I wouldn't talk about a dream until it was afternoon. Has anybody ever heard that superstition before? Okay, some have, some haven't. Some probably think I'm nuts. But there was a superstition I was always told that if you don't talk about a dream until afternoon, it won't come true. So I always joked around about it. It's superstition. But the thing is, my point is that sometimes we got to quit getting out of this idea that if we knock on wood, things will go well. We got to get out of the notion that if a black cat crosses us, there's bad luck coming, or a broken mirror, or walking under a ladder. I can go on with some of the superstition. The one I found was really interesting is in East Asia, they don't use the number 4 because they believe it leads to death. But the thing is, guys, this is what he's talking about here. Why is it that you're following God and you're still leaping over thresholds? Because that was a superstition with Dagon, one of the Babylonian gods, that they would leap over a threshold. The thing is that if a black cat crossed us, we should be an individual who said, well, come what may, because we rely on God. We don't rely on this cat. We don't rely on this ladder. We don't rely on this mirror. We don't rely on things that is some kind of superstition that we will heavily believe on, but we can't believe in the true and living God. Because usually what we do is we talk about this master's house of violence and fraud. We say, well, that's a real bad problem. God's saying, no, there's another problem that I want to address here too. Don't focus on these false things or these false notions that all of our faith hangs the balance on some superstition. Another thing that's brought up too is, this declares the Lord on that day, a cry will be heard from the fish gate. I tried real hard to try to show this little map of what Zephaniah sees in his time. And it's Jerusalem. And the fish gate is a place where they come through and they bring all their fish through from the sea. And he's telling us that there's going to be a cry that is heard from that fish gate. And it says a whale will come from the second quarter. Now, if you look that up, that might be a little bit confusing, because in modern day, there is 4 quarters in Jerusalem. There's a Jewish quarter, there's a Christian quarter, there's an Islam quarter, and I can't remember what the 4th one is. But that's not what it's talking about here. What it's talking about is this particular area that in 2 Kings chapter 14 tells us that that's where Josiah went for his prophecy from the Lord's prophets. And it comes from this particular quarter. And he says there's going to be a cry that comes from there. A loud crash that comes on the hills. It shows us that the things that's going to happen is not just going to be on the outside, it's also going to be on the inside. When you also see there in verse 11, it includes some more places there inside Jerusalem. It's the inhabitants of the mortar. And if you look at a map, if I'm not mistaken, it's down on the bottom towards the marketplace there, and it was called the mortar. And what it's supposed to try to show us here is there's not going to be a place in Jerusalem that's going to be left unpunished. While you look around and you say to yourself, these places are in trouble, the Lord reminds us here that it's not just those places on the outside of the walls of Jerusalem. It's also the inside. And I want to finish with something that happened to me this week. This is Miss Ruth. If you guys have been following along, you know that she passed away this week. She was a crossing guard. And she passed away on the first day of school of all times. And I'd never had a more challenging day than I had on that first day of school, when I had to take her spot and answer to her kids, where's Miss Ruth at? Forgive me for saying this, because hopefully somebody will prove me wrong later in life. But there'll never be another woman like this. I think I've told stories about her where she's had 3 lines of traffic backed up when she was holding a stop sign, and she had 3 girls go across her crosswalk. And every one of those little girls stopped and hugged her. And I'm not talking about like a quick hug and then move along. I'm talking about she held up traffic for these 3 little girls to hug her. She would see me at the end of every shift that we'd done, and she would point at me, and she'd give me a thumbs up, and then she would wave. And it was our sign to say, you have a good day. It's been hard to talk about her because she's not only been an impact to me or that little school at Williamstown, she's been an impact to a community. I remember one young boy came to me while she was still alive and said, "Hey, where's Mrs. Ruth?" And I said, "Well, she's down at the elementary school. She's working down there now." And he says, "I miss her because I loved her hugs." And I said, "Well, I'll give you a hug." And he said, "No, thanks." The reason why I bring this up, folks, is why I've told you not to rely on people and focus on yourself. The one thing is, I don't know about her soul's condition at all. I don't know if she's going to make it or she's going to be condemned for eternal punishment. That's not my call. But here's the thing, though. Me, as a child of God, that has the surety of the hope of heaven, that has been given the great benefits and the love and the rewards that come from following that word, why am I not better than her? I don't recall her ever being mad, but it seems like I get mad if I get behind somebody that drives too slow. Why can't I not just go up to a child that is going through some very difficult times and just give them a hug and tell them it's okay? Why can't I be kind to that guy that doesn't know her from nothing, but yet she makes sure that she sees me every day and does that point and that thumbs up and that wave? It goes back to, guys, that while we think we're doing good, we can be better. And that's my plea for anyone here today. If there's one here that needs to take the next step in their faith, why not? Why not now? There's water prepared. We all understand. We all come to the same conclusion. We talked about necessary inference there a couple weeks back. We all come to the same conclusion that baptism is something that we need to do. That's why we have this prepared. This is why we have this available. This is why we make sure that everything is there in order to do it, because of the certainty that comes along with that. How about repentance? How about needing to do the changes that we need to do right now? While we have the opportunity, while it's not too late. Why not pray about the challenges that come along in our life? Why not pray together that we can overcome the difficulties that we face? You're not alone. You're definitely not alone when you need help in this. So, my prayer to you, if there's one here that needs to respond to any of these things, may I encourage you to take this opportunity while we have this moment to do it together. If you need to respond,